if you look at over the past, say, 10 years, they have an increasing percentage of the time where they have negative energy pricing, negative electricity pricing. And it's because, say in the middle of the day, it's a sunny day, you have a spike in electricity production, but you don't have a spike in demand. And so that electricity gets curtailed. And so one way that they deal with that is to have demand response. So they can say, for example, we have fluctuating supply. We don't know if it's going to be windy. We don't know if it's going to be sunny. And so if we start to encounter shortages, a consumer electricity can shut off, right? And of course, some things can shut off and some things can't. A hospital can't shut off, but other things can. And the thing that they can shut off most easily is Bitcoin miners. They're very flexible. They're not doing anything that's critical, and because they're only part of the network, and so they're able to shut off.
Bitcoin's energy usage has garnered significant attention in the media for several years. It has frequently faced criticism for consuming excessive energy and not utilizing it efficiently. In extreme cases, it has been labeled as a climate or energy disaster. An example of such criticism can be found in Newsweek's article from December 2017, titled "Bitcoin Mining on Track to Consume All of the World's Energy by 2020." Similar headlines were also published by the World Economic Forum. However, as we find ourselves in 2023, it is evident that these predictions did not come to pass. The University of Cambridge is the most widely cited source for estimating Bitcoin's energy consumption. According to their estimates, Bitcoin's annualized energy consumption is currently below 100 terawatt-hours. Even at its estimated peak, it remained below 150 terawatt-hours. In comparison to global energy usage, Bitcoin's energy consumption is negligible. When scientists estimate the world's energy usage for a given year, their calculations can have a margin of error of a few percentage points, let alone a few tenths of a percent. Bitcoin's energy usage accounts for less than 0.1%. Furthermore, a significant portion of the energy used by Bitcoin comes from sources that would otherwise go to waste. In the video, Alden provides more insights into the energy aspect of Bitcoin and discusses the political forces involved in the Bitcoin narrative, which she refers to as the bipartisan nature of Bitcoin.
Please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to drop your comment and observations in the comment section below. Thanks and enjoy the video.
So with any new technology, there's always technology proponents that want to embrace it and accelerate it. And there's people that detract from it, or are worried about the safety of it, are worried about the impacts of it. And then in more corrupt ways, entrenched industries don't want it to flourish. So for example, when the automobile came out, the horse and buggy industry wanted to impose all sorts of restrictions on it to try to kind of slow that down. And I think we're in an environment now where the existing system, whether it's governments, whether it's banking systems, would not exactly be thrilled with a much larger Bitcoin network. And so I think that it's in their interest to kind of, I can see from their perspective why they want to put all these frictions on it. And generally what you see, for example, like, Brad Sherman, he's one of the most vocal Bitcoin and crypto critics. And if you look at who are the biggest donors to his campaign, it's mostly financial institutions, which I think is not a coincidence. And so in some way, I think there's public misperception around Bitcoin, but then there's also entrenched interests. And when you look at Bitcoin mining specifically, that's usually one of the most popular angles to attack it on. Instead of someone saying, I don't like Bitcoin, but people can own it if they want, they say, well, if they keep owning it, they're going to boil the ocean. So we have to take action on them. And you'll often see, so statistics are funny because they can always be used in ways that sound sensationalist and then also sound completely benign. And so for example, you can say Bitcoin uses more electricity than Argentina. That sounds horrific. That sounds like something is out of control, right? Yeah. But if you say Bitcoin uses 0.1% of global energy usage and something like 0.5% of global electricity usage, does that sound like, is that where we should have a lot of our attention? Probably not, especially if it's actually serving a productive new use. Similarly, if you say Bitcoin mining uses about as much energy as the zinc mining industry, is that like a catastrophe? Probably not. So any large industry, if you take a sufficient large industry and compare it to a country that uses, sub 1% of global energy, you're going to have what sounds like a very sensationalist comparison.
Yeah.
And that's been, I think, unfairly used against Bitcoin. I also think that another thing that's poorly understood is that Bitcoin uses mostly non-rival energy, meaning that by the industry's very competitive nature, they have to find the lowest electricity prices. And what are the cheapest energy prices? Usually energy sources that are stranded. Someone built a hydro dam and there's all this electricity being produced and there's not enough buyers of electricity near it. So Bitcoin miners will come in and say, well, we'll buy it for 2 cents a kilowatt hour, and we'll make use of it. And so the question is that harming anyone else? No. And you always have specific anecdotes of, a miner causing an area, like a region to have some sort of issue. But over the long term, the way the market works out is that the Bitcoin miners get pushed towards whatever's cheap, whatever's stranded.
Earlier this month, the president launched an attack against wealthy crypto investors, accusing them of exploiting tax loopholes that are supported by Republican lawmakers. At the same time, Gary Gensler, the chair of the Securities and Exchange Commission, has issued threats of multiple lawsuits against leading crypto exchanges and protocols. Democrats on the House Financial Services Committee, showing their support for Gensler, issued a memo urging fellow party members to adopt his most hardline positions. The memo emphasized the SEC's stance that almost all crypto assets are securities, leaving no room for debate. However, the story doesn't end there. Within the Democratic Party, there are notable dissenters who resist aligning with the party's position. One such example is Representative Richie Torres, the youngest Democrat on the House Financial Services Committee. In the video, Lyn Alden provides her perspective on the topic.
I think a lot of politics today is around theater. They have to show to their constituents that they're taking action. Now, the amount of revenue this would raise compared to a $2 trillion deficit that the government's running is minimal, right? So it's not going to be a significant revenue booster. And then to the extent that it impacts the climate, I think it would have minimal positive impact. And you can actually make the case that it has a negative impact, because one thing that Bitcoin mining does is it actually makes variable energy sources more competitive. So instead of curtailing a lot of electricity that comes from solar, wind, hydro, things like that, it actually makes those more reliable to build because they have a guaranteed buyer for their various fluctuating energy. So it's not clear it would have any impact on the climate. It would have minimal impact on the budget. And I think it's more of that narrative game. So I don't think it'd be good policy. As far as it passing, I think, we're in a very divided setting here. So I think the chance of anything that's controversial passing is low. But because I don't focus on political strategy, I don't really have an edge in determining what's actually likely to pass or not. To your final point is the bipartisan nature of Bitcoin. And so Bitcoin was more quickly embraced by the Republican Party. But to your point, we had one of the leading Democratic candidates speak at a Bitcoin conference. And there was a book published just months ago called The Progressive Case for Bitcoin. Is a progressive person writing positively about Bitcoin for other progressives. And I think we're seeing kind of footholds where Bitcoin is not just seen as a conservative or libertarian adjacent technology, and instead it's one that's at least certain segments of the political left are embracing more. And the reason that's kind of useful is that when you do get sort of controversial bills that could really go after miners or choke Bitcoin away from the banking system and things like that, it gets much harder to pass when you have at least significant minorities on both sides that are willing to go to bat for it. So I think that's
it's a positive then, for sure.
It's one of the most constructive takeaways I have from this conference, yes. I don't know about this year, but so the larger it grows, the more likely it becomes a campaign issue. But I think where it becomes relevant is that, it won't be for most people their biggest campaign issue, but there's a increasing but small percentage of people for which they're single issue voters over Bitcoin. And given how tight elections are, especially in certain states, if you have 3% of the population that is willing to switch sides or not vote or vote independent based on a candidate's Bitcoin position, I think that will reach a point where, it's not like 30% of people are super focused on Bitcoin.
Right.
Instead, that 3% are hyper focused on it. And I do think that becomes increasingly politically relevant in either the next Bitcoin cycle or the one after that.
In a recent interview with Bankless, Torres, a progressive member of the Democratic caucus, expressed his belief in the empowering potential of cryptocurrency. He sees it as a means for workers and creators to liberate themselves from the perceived abuses of the traditional financial system. Torres also challenged the notion that Democrats are universally against crypto, suggesting that the divide is more generational than partisan. Democratic presidential candidate Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is a vocal supporter of Bitcoin, emphasizing its importance as a right and an exercise in democracy. He opposes central bank digital currencies due to concerns about privacy and personal freedom, a stance shared by Governor DeSantis. This unexpected alignment between ideological opposites highlights a potential new fault line in American politics, characterized by establishment versus anti-establishment, centralization versus decentralization, and state versus crypto. As candidates take positions on crypto issues, we may be witnessing significant developments in the country's future. We welcome your thoughts and views on this topic in the comments section below. For more Daily Dose Crypto news, check out these 2 awesome videos on your screen. Click now and we will see you on the next video.